Muammar Gaddafi promised to free Libya from fear and corruption. But soon, the world saw a ruler who used fear as his greatest weapon. And one public execution, carried out in a basketball stadium, revealed the true depth of his cruelty. It became one of the darkest moments in Libya's history that the world would never forget. Muammar Gaddafi came to power in 1969, not through an election, but through a quiet military coup. He was only 27 years old, a young army captain from a poor Bedouin family in the Libyan desert. At the time, Libya was ruled by King Idris I, an aging monarch who was often outside the country for medical treatment. Gaddafi and a small group of fellow officers took advantage of that moment, seizing power overnight without a single bullet being fired. He presented himself as a hero of the people. He talked about equality, free education, and dignity for every Libyan. To many, he sounded like hope. And for a while, it looked like he might actually deliver. He used Libya's vast oil wealth to build schools, hospitals, and housing. Ordinary people who had long lived in poverty suddenly saw roads being built and education becoming free. But beneath that early progress, something darker was growing. Gaddafi didn't want democracy. He wanted total control. He abolished the old constitution and banned all political parties. In their place, he built a system centered around himself. Every idea, every slogan, every speech pointed back to one man, the leader of the revolution. By the mid-1970s, he introduced something called the Jamahiriya, meaning the state of the masses. On paper, it was supposed to be a new kind of direct democracy where the people ruled themselves through local committees. In reality, it became a massive network of spies. These people's committees weren't about giving people a voice. They were there to listen, record, and report. Citizens began to fear each other. Teachers were watched by students. Neighbors were encouraged to inform on neighbors. Even family members started keeping secrets from one another. The idea was to keep everyone scared, so no one would dare to rebel. By the late 1970s, Gaddafi's face was everywhere, in schools, government offices, and on the front page of every newspaper. But behind the propaganda, anyone who criticized him disappeared. Dissidents were labeled stray dogs, a phrase Gaddafi often used in speeches. Many were executed publicly or broadcast on national TV to send a message. By the early 1980s, Libya was no longer a nation of free citizens. The so-called revolutionary committees had spread into every part of life, from universities to workplaces. Their job was to crush opposition and root out traitors. Even people living abroad were not safe. Gaddafi started targeting exiles who spoke out against him, sending assassins to Europe and the Middle East to hunt them down. By 1983, his paranoia reached its peak, setting the stage for what would happen the next year. In 1984, a small group of Libyan exiles decided to take a desperate risk. They wanted to end Gaddafi's rule once and for all. Many of them had fled the country years earlier because of his brutality. From abroad, they formed opposition groups that called themselves the National Front for the Salvation of Libya. They trained secretly in neighboring countries, hoping to spark a rebellion that would free their homeland. In May 1984, about 70 of these men launched an attack on Gaddafi's main compound in Tripoli, the heavily guarded Bab al-Azizia base. This wasn't just any building. It was Gaddafi's personal fortress, filled with soldiers, tanks, and anti-aircraft guns. The attackers believed that if they could reach him there, they could inspire the people to rise up. But they underestimated his control. Within hours, Libyan security forces crushed the assault. Most of the attackers were killed or captured. The failed attack terrified Gaddafi. It proved that his enemies were still out there and that they could strike at the heart of his power. Convinced that foreign countries like Britain, the United States, and Egypt had supported the attack, he reacted with pure rage. He used this as a reason to start a wave of revenge across Libya. Within days, his security forces began sweeping through cities and towns, arresting anyone even suspected of disloyalty. Entire families were questioned. University students, workers, and even government employees were accused of helping the traitors. Gaddafi went on television and warned that every enemy of the revolution would face punishment. Not behind closed doors, but in public for all to see. That same month, 12 people were executed across Libya. Their deaths were broadcast live on national TV. It was the first time many Libyans had seen something so brutal shown so openly. Gaddafi wanted it that way. He wanted to make an example out of them, to show that no one, not even the educated or young, could escape his reach. Students, teachers, and engineers were all targeted. Just being seen as against the revolution was enough to be condemned. And among those arrested during that brutal sweep was Al-Sadek Hamed al-Shuedi, a 30-year-old engineer from Benghazi whose only real crime was speaking too honestly about the country's problems. Al-Sadek Hamed al-Shuedi was born around 1954 in Benghazi, Libya's second-largest city. He grew up in a middle-class family that valued education and hard work. From a young age, he stood out as intelligent and driven. His dream was to use his education to help Libya grow into a modern nation. In the late 1970s, Al-Sadek got the chance to study aeronautical engineering in the United States, something very few Libyans could do at the time. Those were the years when Gaddafi was spending billions from Libya's oil money to modernize the country. But most of that wealth went into weapons and his own projects. Al-Sadek, however, believed he could make a difference. After completing his degree, he returned home, proud and hopeful, ready to work for his country. But what he found was not the Libya he had imagined. By then, fear had seeped into every corner of life. People no longer trusted each other. Speaking your mind could get you killed. The same government that once promised progress was now watching every move, listening to every word. Al-Sadek was not a rebel, not part of any armed group, and certainly not someone plotting attacks. He was just a man who dared to talk about what everyone else was too afraid to say. That corruption was spreading, that ordinary people were suffering, and that Libya had lost its way. He said these things quietly to friends and co-workers. But in a country ruled by paranoia, even a whisper could be fatal. By early 1984, the intelligence services were hunting for anyone who could be linked, even loosely, to the Bab al-Azizia attack. They tapped phones, spied on universities, and pressured students to report suspicious conversations. Someone must have mentioned Al-Sadek's name. Soon he was arrested by Gaddafi's secret police, known for their torture and for forcing confessions out of innocent people. His trial was nothing more than a show. The verdict was decided before it even started. That decision led to one of the most shocking public executions of the 20th century. It was June 5th, 1984, a scorching morning in Benghazi, when loudspeakers across the city ordered citizens to gather at the main basketball stadium near the university. People were told it was a special revolutionary event to honor the martyrs who had died defending the country. Schools were instructed to send students. Factories released workers to attend. Teachers, government employees, and even families were pushed to go. It sounded like a patriotic rally. But when people arrived, they quickly realized something felt wrong. Soldiers stood at every gate with rifles. Armored vehicles were parked near the entrances. No one was allowed to leave. Loudspeakers blasted revolutionary songs, but the atmosphere was tense. Instead of flags and cheers, there was fear and confusion. By mid-morning, thousands had filled the stands under the burning sun. Many had brought small Libyan flags, expecting a speech or parade. Instead, they saw workers setting up a stage in the center of the basketball court. Not for a game, but for a trial. Judges from the Revolutionary Court, wearing military uniforms, sat behind a long table. Soldiers lined the sides of the court, their rifles pointing upward. Several TV cameras from the state broadcaster were positioned around the court, ready to capture everything. No one in the crowd knew exactly what they were about to see. Then the mood changed completely when guards led al-Sadek into the stadium. His hands were tied behind his back. His shirt was soaked with sweat. His face was pale, but calm. The crowd fell silent. The prosecutor stood up and began to read from a paper filled with accusations. He called al-Sadek a traitor, a spy, a man who wanted to destroy the revolution. He claimed al-Sadek had plotted with foreign governments. There was no proof, no witnesses, nothing beyond words written by the state. Al-Sadek tried to speak, but guards shouted for him to stay quiet. The trial lasted less than an hour. It was never meant to find the truth. The court president then announced that al-Sadek was guilty of treason and would be executed immediately. No appeals, no delay. Right there in front of everyone. The judges stood up and left. Soldiers rushed to the center of the court, carrying long wooden poles. Within minutes, a gallows was erected, right under the basketball hoop. The same court where kids once played was now turned into a stage for death. People in the crowd began to realize what was about to happen. Some looked away. Others whispered prayers. But no one dared to leave. The soldiers at the exits made sure of that. They surrounded the platform. One of them held a rope. Another forced al-Sadek to climb the steps to the gallows. His legs trembled, but he didn't resist. A soldier slipped the noose around al-Sadek's neck. His white shirt clung to his body, drenched in sweat. He looked out into the crowd, not in anger, but almost in disbelief. For a moment, it seemed he wanted to say something. Some who were there later said he tried to declare his innocence. Others remembered him whispering a final prayer. Either way, his words were drowned out by the loudspeakers blasting patriotic songs. Children in school uniforms stood in the front rows. Many had never seen death before. Teachers tried to look away, but were too afraid to turn their backs. They couldn't find the strength to speak. Then the moment came. The order was given. The executioner pulled the lever, and the trapdoor opened. His body dropped, but the fall was short. The rope tightened and his body jerked violently. Gasps spread through the stadium. He didn't die instantly. He struggled, twisting and shaking, trying to breathe. It was a horrible sight. The executioners panicked. They had misjudged the rope's length. Some soldiers rushed forward unsure what to do, but the cameras were still rolling. The entire country was watching, live. The regime couldn't stop it now. Instead of a clean execution, it became a horrifying scene of a man dying slowly in front of thousands. Some people in the stands began to cry, but soldiers barked orders to keep chanting, forcing people to clap and shout praises to Gaddafi as the man's body twitched in the air. Among the crowd that day stood Huda Ben Amer, a woman who, until that morning, was just another face in the audience. She had been born in the small town of Marj, near Benghazi, into a poor family that had little power or influence. Like many young Libyans, she had joined Gaddafi's revolutionary committees. For people like Huda, loyalty to Gaddafi was a way out of poverty and a chance to be noticed. When she arrived at the stadium, she came as a devoted supporter of the regime. She believed, like many committee members, that anyone accused of betraying the revolution deserved to die. But she didn't know she would soon become part of the execution itself. As al-Sadek's body hung before the silent crowd, struggling for breath, that's when Huda moved. Without being told, she ran from the stands, pushing past guards, and climbed onto the stage. Cameras kept rolling, catching every second. She reached for al-Saddaq's legs, wrapped her arms around them, and pulled down hard. The movement was sudden, violent, and final. Within seconds, the struggling stopped. What she had done was shocking. No woman had ever done something like that in public, let alone on national television. For a few seconds, the stadium froze. Then one of the officers began to clap. Soon, other soldiers joined in. That moment changed Huda's life forever. Gaddafi himself was said to have been impressed. To him, she was an example of absolute devotion, someone willing to kill with her own hands for his cause. Almost overnight, Huda Ben Amr became a symbol of loyalty. The government flooded her with rewards. She was given luxury cars, a large house, and a position in the Revolutionary Committee's leadership. Within a few years, she was promoted again, this time to mayor of Benghazi, one of Libya's largest and most influential cities. It was a position of real power, one usually reserved for military men or senior officials. But Gaddafi wanted to make a point that loyalty was more valuable than experience. Her new fame also came with fear. People in Benghazi began to call her Huda the Executioner. Parents whispered her name as a warning to their children. She became one of the most feared figures in Libya. If she attended a public event, people lowered their heads. If her car appeared in the streets, shops closed their doors. Everyone knew what she had done, and everyone knew Gaddafi trusted her completely. The horror didn't end when al-Saddaq's body went still. The execution was replayed again and again on Libyan state television. It was broadcast proudly, as if it were a national achievement. Every few hours, it was shown during the evening news, between speeches and patriotic songs, with commentators praising the strength of the revolution. Families across Libya sat frozen in their living rooms, unable to look away. Parents tried to cover their children's eyes, but the images were already burned into everyone's minds. And that exactly was Gaddafi's goal. Newspapers followed the same script. The next morning, front pages across the country carried headlines calling al-Saddaq a traitor and enemy of the revolution. His so-called confession, written by the regime, was printed word for word. Everyone knew it was a lie, but no one dared to say that out loud. His family suffered the most. They weren't allowed to hold a funeral or even see his body. The government refused to release it, claiming he didn't deserve a burial. Soldiers were stationed outside their home for days, watching every visitor. Neighbors avoided the house completely, not because they didn't care, but because helping them could get them killed too. Friends who tried to offer condolences were detained or warned to stay silent. The family's phone was cut off, and their names quietly disappeared from government records. In Benghazi, fear spread faster than wildfire. People stopped talking in public. At the university, student groups that once met to discuss ideas or reform were dissolved overnight. Professors deleted their lecture notes if they mentioned anything political. Even casual conversations in coffee shops died out. Students who had cheered during the early years of Gaddafi's revolution now looked over their shoulders before saying anything. By 2011, Libya was a country that had been living under one man's rule for 42 long years. People were tired of pretending to support a system they secretly hated. Prices were rising, corruption was everywhere, and basic freedoms didn't exist. Then came the spark that changed everything. In January 2011, Tunisia's dictator was overthrown after weeks of protests. Soon after, Egypt's Hosni Mubarak fell. Ordinary Libyans watched these events unfold on television and social media. They saw people like themselves stand up and win. It was enough to push them over the edge. In February, protests broke out in Benghazi, the very same city where al-Saddaq had been executed. History was coming full circle. At first, the protests were peaceful. People held signs calling for freedom and democracy. But the government's response was immediate and violent. Gaddafi's security forces opened fire on unarmed protesters. Dozens were killed within days. The killings only fueled the anger. What began as protests soon turned into an armed uprising. Whole cities joined in. Soldiers began defecting to the rebels, and the eastern part of Libya slipped out of Gaddafi's control. The regime tried everything to hold on. Gaddafi appeared on TV ranting about rats and traitors. He ordered airstrikes on rebel-held areas and deployed tanks into cities. But this time, the fear that had ruled Libya for decades was gone. People had seen too much. They remembered the public hangings, the executions, and the endless propaganda. They had reached a point where living under tyranny was worse than dying for freedom. As the war spread, chaos reached the government's archives in Tripoli and Benghazi. When rebel forces stormed these buildings, they discovered thousands of documents, tapes, and secret reports, years of evidence showing how Gaddafi's regime had controlled and terrorized the population. Among them was a single, chilling tape, the original footage of al-Sadek's execution. It had been locked away for decades. Human Rights Watch and international journalists helped recover and digitize the tape. When it was shown to the world, the reaction was immediate. The footage didn't just show a man being executed. It exposed the culture of cruelty that Gaddafi's regime had built. Soon after, as rebels took control of Benghazi, angry crowds stormed Huda Ben Amr's mansion. Her once lavish home, filled with gifts from Gaddafi, was burned to the ground. She barely escaped the city and went into hiding. By October 2011, Gaddafi's own time had run out. He was captured and killed by rebels in his hometown of Sirte. Al-Sadek's brother, Ibrahim Chouedi, never stopped searching for justice. When the footage resurfaced in 2011, he worked with Human Rights Watch to ensure it wasn't lost again. He wanted the world to see what Libyans had lived through. He wanted to restore his brother's name, to show that al-Sadek wasn't a traitor, but a man silenced for speaking his mind.